Welcome to Dialogue on Water Economics and Policy, where we discuss water-related issues every quarter. I'm your host, Nilüfer Nasrallahzadeh. Join me and my colleagues, Dr. Namadi and Dr. Dinar, as we learn about potential policy solutions for today's biggest environmental challenges. Today, we will first have a guided Q&A regarding PFAS in the environment, and at the end, my fellow colleagues will have an open discussion with our guests. Joining us today is Jen Jackson, Toxics Reduction and Healthy Ecosystems Program Manager at SF Environment. Welcome, Jen, and thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Jen Jackson. I work for the City of San Francisco in the Department of the Environment, and I lead our Toxics Reduction and Healthy Ecosystems Program, which is a portfolio really of programs, everything from urban forestry, integrated pest management, to managing our flame retardants ordinance and our green business program. So a whole lot of things underneath that umbrella.
Thank you, and we're so glad you joined us today. So I'm going to go ahead and go into our guided Q&A with our first question. Please tell us about PFAS and where it can generally be found.
PFAS is a family or class of chemicals that are characterized by a carbon-fluorine bond. So all PFAS have at least one carbon-fluorine bond, and that bond is not natural. It has to be synthesized, so you won't find them naturally in nature, but we find them a lot in nature now because that bond is very difficult to break, and so that makes those chemicals very persistent in the environment. So we find them in lots of places. We're finding them in drinking water, wastewater, and that's because they're in a lot of products that we use every day, whether it's our Gore-Tex jackets, our Scotch-guarded clothes and shoes and carpets. And it's also used in things that you wouldn't necessarily suspect, but like lubricants and dyes and adhesives. They confer an oil, water, and grease resistance, and also can be used to prevent stains. So you'll see them a lot, unfortunately.
They're everywhere. Thank you. So what does your agency do about eliminating PFAS from takeout foodware?
About 3 or 4 years ago, we were working on our own contract for the purchase of foodware in our hospitals. We run 2 hospitals through the city, and we buy foodware for the cafeterias. And we had been hearing that PFAS could show up in food packaging and foodware to create that oil water resistance, so your lunch doesn't end up on your lap as you're eating it. And we were concerned about that because we know that these chemicals are linked to a lot of different toxicities, thyroid impacts, carcinogens, et cetera. And so we wanted to see if we could eliminate them from our own purchases. So we worked with our supplier and identified some alternatives. We did some testing of those alternatives to make sure they actually were PFAS free. And we converted our contract to ensure that what we were buying, as much as possible, was PFAS free. And then when we were doing that, as we started testing products, we noticed that some products that were labeled compostable had these chemicals in them. And something that is persistent and doesn't break down in the environment is not compostable. So we went to the certification organization and said, you know, you have these products that are certified, but they really shouldn't be. Is there a way for us to help you update your standard so you eliminate PFAS and don't allow those to be in the products that you certify anymore? And that certification organization is called Biodegradable Products Institute. They're one of the largest in the US. And they said, yes, they would be very willing to work on this. It's really important to them to protect compost quality. And so it took them a little while, probably about 1.5 years, but they eventually changed their standard, which is actually really fast in the world of standards. And now one can no longer get one's product certified by them and still have intentionally added PFAS. You may have recycled content or incidental PFAS that you're not aware of. And if they require a test to ensure that you don't have PFAS, and if it shows any fluorine, then they ask you to find out where it's coming from. And there's organic fluorine and inorganic fluorine. And if it's organic fluorine, then it's probably PFAS. If it's inorganic, it might be coming from talc or some other source that is not PFAS, and then it's not of concern. And so once we were able to get the standard changed, it all of a sudden opened up the possibilities of banning PFAS containing compostables across the entire city. So if you run a restaurant, then we would ask you no longer to provide takeout foodware that contains PFAS. And folks are not going to go do testing or dig and search for these products. They just need a place to go to find them. And so the BPI registry of products is the place they can go. So they can go and find products that they need, whether it's a little cup or a plate or whatever, they can see there where they can find them. And so once we had that registry of products, we could pass an ordinance that bans PFAS in compostables. And that went into effect last January.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. And what does your agency do regarding eliminating city purchases of carpet and furniture containing PFAS?
So this was another project that we worked on more or less in parallel to the foodware. We were learning that PFAS is often contained in textiles to create a stain resistance. And in fact, in our own offices, in the carpet behind me, we have a very, very lovely carpet, I should say, we have moved from that place actually, but I haven't seen our new location because of COVID. But that carpet was certified, but at the time that it was certified 10 years ago or so, no one really had PFAS on their radar. But all of a sudden PFAS got on our radar, and we wanted to see if any purchases that we were making as a city were supporting that industry. And in fact, we were making purchases like that carpet. And so we looked into where might we be able to procure carpet that didn't have PFAS. And we worked with a couple different manufacturers. And as we were doing this, a number of other large institutional purchasers were also. So Google and Harvard, Facebook, Kaiser, they were asking these same questions. And so the industry started to hear what we were asking and started to shift its production. And I want to say it was about 2018 when we started to hear that all the major carpet companies in the United States were phasing out PFAS. And that was all in the commercial sector. So carpet tiles and things that you would see in an institution or a library or something like that, businesses. But then the same manufacturers that make commercial carpet, they also make residential carpet. And they started to hear from retailers who were getting pressure from advocacy organizations that retailers didn't want to be selling these carcinogens either. And so Lowe's and Home Depot have also pledged to no longer sell carpet containing PFAS. So it actually went really fast. The carpet sector went very fast. I think you asked about furniture too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Furniture has not gone as quickly because it's not as simple industry in terms of how many manufacturers there are. There are only about 8 or 9 major manufacturers of carpet in the US. But furniture comes from all over the world. It's not as heavy, it's not as bulky, so we don't always manufacture it in the United States. And there's just lots of manufacturers. And on top of that, it's multi-components. So you have the hard parts of the chair, and then you have the soft parts of the chair. And the textiles may be made by somebody completely different than the hard parts, the armrests or whatever. And so one manufacturer may say, we don't use PFAS, but if you choose a textile that does have PFAS in it, they may not know. And so that has been a real challenge. And again, we've been working with a lot of partners to try to identify manufacturers that can source textiles that don't have PFAS. And just recently, we passed a regulation because there are finally enough products and lists of products. And the regulation is on ourselves to no longer purchase furniture that contains PFAS. And we are pointing to the Healthy Hospitals Initiatives list. And we've been working with them to make sure it aligns with our needs too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's just some, amazing work, and seeing the transition and the change is really, amazing. And can you tell us a bit about your agency working with the SF Fire Department and the SF International Airport to transition to fluorine-free firefighting foams?
Sure. So many of your listeners may know that firefighting foam is one of the biggest sources of PFAS contamination across the country. Anytime a firefighting company does an exercise, a training event, and they're using foam, it's very likely that that foam contains PFAS. And for so long, no one really was concerned about it. And so those would contaminate the ground, potentially cause groundwater contamination or surface water contamination. So now we know that. And there are a number of organizations that have been working to try to offer other firefighting foams that don't contain PFAS. And there's multiple different types of foams that you might need, but for fires that are for vehicles that have fuel in them, so any kind of fire that has a fuel, you would likely need a foam that creates a blanket. And PFAS does a great job of blanketing and extinguishing fires. So the challenge has been to make sure that not only is it PFAS free, but it also has to work. And so we, as a city and with a number of other jurisdictions like the state of Minnesota, Connecticut, and Washington, we've been working to try to find out who is making a functional product that doesn't have PFAS. And there is now a certification that just became available about a year ago called the Green Screen Certified Program, I guess, certification for firefighting foam. And they had originally just 3 certified foams, and now they have 10. So very quickly, the industry is moving to create products and get them certified. And the certification is essentially that it's PFAS free, but not only is it PFAS free, it doesn't contain other chemicals that we know to be harmful, like carcinogens, reproductive toxicants. So our city is on the cusp of switching over. We actually don't use a lot of PFAS containing foam. We tend to fight fires with water, but our fire boats actually often have PFAS on the boats because pier fires can tend to have a lot of fuels. So working with our fire department to choose one of those 10 foams that has a certification. And then the other challenge is to decontaminate all the equipment that's already been used with PFAS containing foam, because PFAS is, even though it's a non-stick agent, it actually is very sticky. It sticks around. That persistence means that we actually need to clean out our equipment well so that we don't continue to bleed PFAS out into the environment over time, somewhat unwittingly. So we're working with a couple different potential contractors to figure out an approach. This is all brand new. Nobody really has done this. The Germans have done a few fire trucks. So they're our model right now. And we're looking at decontaminating one fireboat, and then we're working with SFO. They have a number of different kinds of firefighting vehicles. And we're looking at doing a comparison of 2 different approaches to see which approach for decontamination will work for their equipment. It's exciting, and we haven't completed it yet. We're still in process on this one.
Thank you. Our last question is, how does your agency work on identifying other sources of PFAS to the environment?
Good one. So we have been working with a number of labs to test different things, and then we have a lot of friends in this space who are also testing products and trying to identify where the PFAS contamination might be coming from, say in wastewater. So the wastewater industry in the Bay Area right now is completing testing of wastewater, and they're going to see whether there's a lot of PFAS in their effluent, and then eventually go upstream to see which kinds of industries might be discharging PFAS and whether the residential sector is discharging a lot of PFAS to them. And my hunch is that we're going to see maybe not quite as much, but at least a significant portion coming from the residential sector. Recently, there was a publication that identified more than 200 different sectors that use PFAS in their processes. And so, like I said before, there's everything from adhesives and dyes and lubricants. So you can imagine all these different things can be used in a wide variety of industries. So, with the food packaging, going back to your first question, there were a number of companies, when we tested their products, they said, we don't use PFAS in our product. How is it that you're getting a result that indicates we use PFAS? And it turned out that they were using a mold release agent. So you put this paper pulp onto a mold to make a bowl, say. You need something on there, kind of like if you're making a pancake, you might spray or put some butter down so it doesn't stick. Same kind of concept. They were using a mold release agent that had PFAS because it's non-stick. But it never occurred to them that that's what was causing their PFAS hits. So by the same token, we think a lot of industries are probably using PFAS containing products and not even aware that they are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That was very informative, and I definitely learned a lot from our interview. And I think now we can move to our open discussion with Dr. Namadi and Dr. Dinar.
Thanks, Jen. That was great. I really enjoyed listening to this. And so I heard you are saying that suddenly PFAS got a lot of attention. And what was the reason that this PFAS got a lot of attention and recently? Is that new technology that could identify PFAS or something else that's happening? And also, is it in California got a lot of attention, or is US on the board?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why now? I have colleagues at the Environmental Working Group, which is a nonprofit organization, and they have been working on the issue of PFAS since 2010, 2011, 2012. They actually tried to ban PFAS in foodware way back then at the state legislature. And so they're probably tearing their hair out saying, why now? We tried to do this 12 years ago before we weren't all polluted. I think probably there was a unregulated contaminant monitoring regulation with the UCMR. It's an EPA program that requires drinking water systems to test their drinking water. If you serve over 10,000 people, you have to test your drinking water for unregulated contaminants. And at that time, PFAS, and still actually at this time, PFAS is not a regulated contaminant in drinking water. So in 2013, 2014, many agencies across the country tested their drinking water, and many of them had hits of PFAS in their drinking water. And in 2012, a report was released indicating the connections between PFOA and PFOS with carcinogenicity, reproductive toxicity, thyroid problems, cardiovascular problems, high cholesterol, a number of health ailments. And so, to see that this many drinking water sources have PFAS in them and could potentially cause all of these health problems, I think it woke people up. And so those results from the UCMR came out, I think it was about 2015, 2016. And all of a sudden people wanted to know where the heck it was coming from. And so a lot of testing started to happen. Where could these be used so that we're getting this in our drinking water? And I want to give a lot of credit to the activist community, like Environmental Working Group, Clean Water Action. There have been so many different organizations that have been advocating at many different levels to try to address these chemicals. And I think we're at a point where we're at a tipping point, I hope anyway, that we're going to stop seeing these being used as often.
Thank you.
So really very exciting topic, and knowing that this is something that many agencies, certainly here in Southern California, are involved in, this even makes it even more important. I have actually three questions. One question that was triggered by one of your description, and two that I wanted some clarification. So my understanding was, until now, until today, until you talked, was that PFAS is going to be seen or found in drinking water or in aquifers as a result of decomposition of or chemical or otherwise of kinds of different compounds. Now, from your description, you gave that example of the carpet. So how PFAS that are part of a carpet, how they are going to end up in groundwater or in wastewater?
Sure. Well, I think this is something that a lot of people don't want to admit, but everything is connected, right?
Oh, I know.
So the connection is that a number of them. So first of all, if you are a carpet manufacturer, then you are manufacturing this carpet in a facility, and you need water to clean that carpet, clean the fibers, etc. And then you discharge that water. And I can tell you in Dalton, Georgia, where there are a lot of carpet companies, it's the mecca for carpet in the United States, the downstream rivers and streams, et cetera, from these manufacturing facilities are highly contaminated by PFAS. So, and you know, there isn't a discharge requirement by the EPA on these discharges at this point, but it's a serious problem. So that's one way it can get into our drinking water. Another way is at the end of the useful life of a carpet, when you rip that carpet out because it's no longer good, it's going to go to a landfill. And landfills, although often you can go into them and find things in perfect condition, over time things break down. And what happens with carpet is the fibers are actually usually the first things to break down, or maybe the backing. And the chemicals that are persistent as part of that fiber, they stick around. And then over time, as you know, the organic materials and other materials around it start to putrefy, there's a liquid that forms in a landfill, and that's leachate that's collected. And that goes to a wastewater facility typically to get treated. Wastewater can't remove PFAS. They weren't meant, wastewater facilities are meant to break down organic material, things that are biodegradable. They're not meant to break down persistent organic pollutants. So they can't break it down. It gets discharged, say, into a stream that becomes part of a river, that becomes part of a drinking water source. In San Francisco, we drink water that comes from the Sierra from snowmelt. We're really lucky. And when you talk to our Public Utilities Commission, you'll hear more about our system. We're not downstream of a wastewater agency, but many people in this country's drinking water comes from a source that's downstream of the wastewater industry. And last but not least, I should say, drinking water aside, there's exposure in the use of these products. So a baby crawling around on a carpet is going to ingest whatever comes off of that carpet. And we know that the PFAS chemicals are coming off of these products. They, hand-to-mouth behavior, they're going to ingest it. It's in the dust. And so anytime a kid or a pet or you are down on the floor, you're going to get it on your body. You eat your sandwich, you get it in your body. So the exposures from products are real too.
Okay.
They're not as high as if you were drinking contaminated water, but they do exist.
You mentioned that your agency, San Francisco Environment, comes with ordinances or suggests ordinances. Are these ordinances only for the agencies that are San Francisco government agencies, or to every individual business in San Francisco?
It depends.
Okay, I will tell you why. This is just the beginning of the question. Okay. This is a complicated. Now, I know that San Francisco is a tourist city. I don't know, again, the statistics, how much of the revenue or the economic, the GDP of the city comes from tourism. But what I know is when I used to live in Sacramento and going to San Francisco, my family, we consumed food that was delivered to us. We went to a restaurant, but we didn't sit in the restaurant. Everything was in containers. And if I remember what you said that this is one source of the PFAS, the containers of food. So is that a special problem for your agency to deal with a city that a big share of its income comes from tourists who consume food or that is delivered in styrofoams or other things that include PFAS? And how are you able to regulate that huge industry, the food industry, for tourists?
Yeah, well, so to answer your first question, sometimes we just regulate ourselves and we'll pass an ordinance just to regulate city departments and city operations. And other times we'll pass ordinances that are across the entire city, whether it's businesses or residents. So in the case of food packaging, foodware, takeout foodware in particular, we first worked on our own purchases and regulated ourselves. But we knew we couldn't do a citywide ban unless we could identify products easily. And so that's where that certification came in. They have a list of products. So we could say to the taqueria, now you have a list, you have to go off this list. With the question around tourism, right now during COVID, tourism, of course, is down, but eating out, takeout food is up. And so restaurants are using more takeout foodware than ever, more than they did before. They're not serving. We're just about to open up again. I think we actually have just opened up outdoor dining, but even so, there's a lot of takeout being used. So our ordinance went into effect last January, and we started outreach before it went into effect, so before COVID, and we were educating people about how to find these products and let them know why it's important. It's not just because we're, in our little bubble, it's because we're concerned about people's health. And when you eat off that packaging, the PFAS comes off onto your food. So that's, an exposure for you. So we don't know how much compliance there is, because with COVID, a lot of our resources have been diverted to disaster response. So we haven't been working with our restaurants, but once we go back into the office and once we're able to work with our restaurants, we'll be making sure, we'll go into the restaurants and make sure that they're using BPI certified products. And it's a challenge because people buy stuff from everywhere. They buy it on Amazon, they buy it, it gets shipped from other places, but a lot of restaurants are purchasing from local suppliers. So one of the things we did is we educated the local suppliers of what PFAS is and asked them to please only offer to their customers in San Francisco products that don't have PFAS that are certified.
Okay. And then my last question is a really quick question. Have you seen any increase in PFAS concentrations in cities' water reservoirs after the fires?
Oh, that's a good question. Our public utilities folks would be able to hopefully answer that. I don't know. So our department, it's interesting that you asked the question about the foodware. Our department is, a lot of our funding comes from our refuse rate, from the garbage rate. And so a lot of the things we work on are related to solid waste and toxic waste. And our Public Utilities Commission, we work very closely with them because it's all part of the environment, everything's connected, but they oversee our water and wastewater. And so I actually often work with the wastewater folks because unfortunately, a lot of times toxic chemicals end up as waste, right? And so we're always trying to figure out how do we reduce and go upstream and reduce those sources of contamination.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I actually have an additional question, if that's okay.
Sure.
As a policy, I'm a master's of public policy student, and I'm always, wondering how powerful are campaigns, programs, or policies in reducing PFAS in the environment?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would like to say that they are very effective. We have been seeing with our work, and we're not in a vacuum. We're working with other progressive leaders, Harvard and Kaiser and Google, big purchasers especially. When we all decide something together around the same time that we're going to push the market responds, right? If you talk to an economist, there's demand, supply will eventually meet that demand. Mm-hmm. And so we've been demanding that products be safer. We've been demanding that manufacturers start to look at what chemicals they're using and do a hazard assessment of their chemicals. So like I said, with foodware, we are now seeing, if you went to Biodegradable Products Institute's registry of products before, there was nothing about PFAS. So 4 years ago, they didn't talk about PFAS. Now it's PFAS free, and you see more and more products that are in that marketplace, and people are asking for them, they're buying them. In the carpet world, our advocacy and our purchasing choices completely shifted that industry. I mean, the 8 or 9 largest manufacturers in this country have heard all of us, all of our partners demanding that they get out of this. And I will say that the liability for discharging a persistent organic pollutant into the environment, they're going to have to pay for the cleanup. So they're seeing that too. So it's in their interest to change. So I think that it makes a huge difference when we speak up and use our dollars as the power of the purse, use our dollars as our vote, and telling manufacturers and the industry what we want. They do respond. It might take a little time, some more than others, some industries more than others, but I think it does work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all for your interest.
Yes, it was definitely a great interview, and I think that's all of the questions we have for today, but I really wanted to thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your day to chat with us